But you were like, I saw it and I got the impression, I was like, this dude is really pretentious and doesn't seem to have a full grasp of the economics of tariffs. And I was like, you're not wrong, but like you're missing so much. And it makes me want to like be it makes me almost maybe want to like devil's advocate this.
Austrian business cycle should give us a like relatively like testable hypothesis of like, you know, a boom should have some prediction of how big the recession is, versus like a more like Chicago school plucking model would be like a recession should have some impact on how fast the recovery is. And it seems like to me, this hypothesis should be testable either way.
And then we have all of the unknown factors that obviously change behavior, such as a new war or an asteroid.
I mean, I think we can get, again, probabilistic outcomes. Like if we saw during Trump's first term, he imposed, you know, tariffs on China, and then we saw exchange rates appreciated against China. Like we could do a multivariable regression.
Right, like so yeah, you can look at it, you can do regression analysis, right? But I mean, like, again, that depends on how you do it.
You know, what my uncle's name is also my best guess. My family could be, conceivably, it is possible that my family is lying to me about my uncle's real name. If you want to see more content like this, I would really appreciate you liking and subscribing. It really helps with the algorithm. And make sure to check out the Discord and other social links in the description. Well, first of all, tell my stream who you are. You can do that.
Yeah. I've been gone for a little while. I used to be really big. Well, not big.
No need to brag. Nice one.
I did not mean that. I was just saying I used to be on Twitch and like, yeah. And so I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I am a hardcore libertarian. I am a right-wing anarchist, whatever position you want to, voluntarist, whatever. You can find me, Fabian Liberty, on YouTube. Because, you know, you should probably get off Twitch. If you're on Twitch still, you're an idiot, I think. Or at least if you're a conservative, and or a radical lefty at this point. Either one of those, you should probably get off Twitch. And you can find me on Twitter, same thing, Fabian Liberty.
Yeah. Give me a second. I'm still setting this up.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, of course.
So I think we I guess you want to talk about what the catalyst for why we're both in this VC right now.
Yeah. I was doing some trolling on Twitter. You know what I mean? I was looking around.
As we do. Yep.
And I saw you. I don't even remember, because I don't care to remember the exact details or anything. You know, figure you're here now, right? Like, who cares what like the 2 sentence was? But anyways, I saw you on Twitter, and you were like, I don't know, rightly so, castigating some MAGA person or some righty on like their inability to understand tariffs. But you were like, I saw it and I got the impression, I was like, this dude is really pretentious and doesn't seem to have a full grasp of the economics of tariffs. And I was like, you're not wrong, but like you're missing so much. And it makes me want to like be it makes me almost maybe want to like devil's advocate this. Because there's just so much more there, and you were very confident in what appeared to be a very low resolution understanding of tariffs. And I was like, and then you were like, well, fucking enlighten me then, bro. And I was like, yeah, like I think the left has a problem, especially with an obsession with empiricism, an obsession on individual data points and first order consequences. In terms of the way that they view the economic landscape, apart from, you know, the axioms or the the desires of government or their, what they find morally acceptable, right? Setting all of that aside, just purely from like a prescriptive position of understanding what is, not what ought be. That those are kind of like things that I think are really, really common and unfortunate in the way that we view economic things. And then I was like, whatever, fuck it, I'll come and chit chat about it. So like, I don't really have a structure for this so much as because I don't really know you. I figured to get to know you and chit chat about a little economics or whatever, and you can pick my brain about whatever's going on, and or vice versa, and we'll just kind of hanging out.
Yeah, I don't have a particular structure either. So I guess the reason I'm smug on Twitter is because I feel like a lot of the like super pro tariff MAGA people don't match their conviction to their level of knowledge. So it seems like they are kind of vehemently pro-tariff, but then if I ask them things like, they'll say things like the money is like leaving our country when we buy like foreign products, and like that, it just shows I don't think they can't describe to me like what the balance of payments is in that respect. So I guess that's the reason I'm fine being smug to them, because I feel like I've read a decent amount about tariffs by now. Obviously, some of it is empirical evidence, which I can understand if you have a frustration with that in general. But usually when I go into these debates or whatever, we're kind of operating on the same framework of like this empirical evidence can have value. So that's the reason I'm usually fine with citing it, at least to some extent. It's usually they just they say it's all like liberal woke stuff, or they'll deflect to like some other thing. So like generally I try, no one's perfect, okay, to like match my conviction to my level of knowledge. So like I'm fine. Like if you bring up things here, like you don't like empiricism or whatever, the left has too much obsession with empiricism.
Hold on. I think maybe we're misunderstanding what I mean by the obsession with empiricism, right? So what I would say is one can discover knowledge through empirics, right? But if we follow formal logic, right, and we understand the law of the excluded middle, right, something is either true or false, right? There is no such thing as a statement that is not either true or false, right? And reality and the laws of logic and what has occurred in the past are facts, right? Like, and so we attempt to ascertain these facts through empirics, right? And in hard sciences, there's not like a lot of problem with that, right? Like if I subject pure clean water, in a clean room, right, where there's nothing else in the water, it's perfectly H2O, and I get it to 212 degrees Fahrenheit, it's gonna fucking boil, right? Like it's gonna turn into gas, right? That is a fact of, or that we have discovered through empirical evidence or through the scientific method, right? The issue that when I say that like there's an issue with empiricism and the obsession with empiricism is that economics is wildly different than that, right? Like the same is true of like psychology. It's a soft science.
I don't disagree. It's a soft,
Right, there are innumerable factors, and it is impossible for us to isolate all variables, right? So what we do is we use empirics to kind of go, okay, well, the last 100 times we tried this, this happened. So we have some certain level of confidence that if we do that thing, that 100 out of 100 times it happened, we have some level of confidence that like that's probably going to happen again. But of course, technically speaking, that's a hotshot fallacy, right? Like just because something happened 100 times before doesn't mean it's going to happen again. But that doesn't mean that like that you still have to engage in a world of unknown and kind of work off of probabilistic outcomes based off of those variables. Now, there is a problem with MMTers and Keynesians and even the Chicago School where they will I'm struggling to think how to put this. There's a problem where they will attempt to use said empirics to go against what we could know from a praxeological perspective, right? So like Paul Krugman getting a Nobel Prize in economics for saying that raising the minimum wage so long as it's done slowly has no downward pressure on the labor market. Like we know that's just not true. Like we can logically know that that's not true. That if you create a price floor where the price can't go below, that there's some level of voluntary transaction of labor and services, or monetary trade for labor, that some of that is going to get priced out of the market. And if you price some of that out of the market, right, then what you've done is you've now created a larger labor pool. And if you've created a larger labor pool, then other labor positions that are in competition in similar situations have now become less competitive or become more competitive, which is obviously going to have a downward pressure on wages. Like he got a Nobel Prize for using empirics to say that something that is logically not true is true because look at my wonderful data models, right? You know what I mean? Like, so it's like, that's kind of what I'm getting at.
I like the first thing I would ask with that. Even if we assume that we can logically deduce a model, right, that can prove this as a matter of logic true, for, a priori before we observe it, could we at least use like empirics to determine, like, for example, like how elastic the demand for labor, like how elastic do we think that is?
Well, so long as you say we think, right? You know what I mean? Then it doesn't fucking matter, right? Like, you obviously can use empirics to be like, we don't know what's going on, right? And so what do? Well, we gather a bunch of data and then we attempt to try and figure out what's going on. And it's our best guess. And that's okay that it's our best guess. We have to work in the world of best guesses. I mean,
I don't fully disagree.
Guess.
Well, I don't fully disagree. It's a best guess, but like, what my uncle's name is also my best guess. My family could be, conceivably, it is possible that my family is lying to me about my uncle's real name. I guess like if we have a number of studies, now I haven't done a deep dive in minimum wage or anything, but we have a number of studies.
Yeah, there's just one example. You can use one if you know one better.
But, well, I know a little bit about like some studies in tariffs pass through. It's like if we have a number of studies about like, the pass through rate of Trump's tariffs for like all above 90% to consumers. Like logically we can understand like why a tariff might have, the tax burden might fall on the consumer. I would say,
yeah, we can. We don't need the empirics for that. That's
sure.
purely you can use praxeology,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like if you, yeah.
But couldn't we also like use empirics? I would say it's more of an empirical question as to like how much of the burden is going to fall on the U.S. versus China through lowering export prices. Like, aren't these empirically tested questions that could have some value?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on what you mean by some value, right? Like, you can use economic models based off of, as probabilistic as you can. And some models and some data is going to be more accurate than others, right? The further out you go, the less accurate it's going to get. And like, but you can generally understand, okay, a downward pressure is going to occur. And then we're going to use all of these metrics to try and estimate what we think that downward pressure is going to be, right? And it's perfectly fine to do that. But it's like, when I say that the left has this kind of obsession with empirics, which is what I was kind of saying before, is that, like, for example, right, when Kamala Harris put out her tax plan and when Donald Trump put out, they both put out their economic plans, right?
Sure.
You had all of these economists coming out of the woodwork being like, well, Donald Trump's plan is going to cost us this much, and Kamala Harris's plan is going to cost us this much. And it's based off of this understanding of like, well, this is how much tax revenue will be lost by cutting taxes to this degree, right? And that is a wildly, hilariously dumb claim for any of them to make. I challenge all of those PhD professors and people who've been, studying and engaging in their job and workplace in economics to actually back up that stupid fucking claim, right? Because like we have things like the Laffer curve, right? Like sometimes when you lower taxes, you increase productivity. And when you increase productivity, you increase the amount of economic transactions that occur in the marketplace, and thus you increase tax revenue. Many of these same people said that the Trump tax cuts would lead to less revenue, and it turned out it led to more tax revenue, more federal tax revenue. Right?
Wait,
so
how do we know that?
More tax money. Well, because you can look at the budget, like the accounting.
We empirically test it, right? So, like, isn't where the peak on the Laffer curve is? Isn't this more of an empirical question?
Oh, yeah. Oh, are you asking how do we know that the tax cut is what did that? Just the same way that the same critique that I said before is valid from your perspective as well. It could be some other factor, right? But it still goes to my answer, which is if the economists are saying this is going to cost us money, and then in the future the opposite occurs, it could be the Laffer curve, it could be some other unknown economic variables, right? But it still goes to prove the point that is a wild and almost baseless claim of trying to use accounting as a means of economics, and they're just not the same thing.
I mean, I guess I'll mention a few things. One, I think like what you just said shows that empirics can have some value there. Like we can, like we do, even if we can logically deduce a model, the exact the elasticity of the demand curves and all those models and the supply curves and where the peak on the Laffer curve, these are all, I would say, like empirically types of things where the burden of a tax can fall is something that we could know through empirical test. So I think that's, and I think those could change.
It's saying that you could know. You can't know.
Well, with a high probability. I mean, I have a good guess again as to what my uncle's name is. Like, I'm obviously not saying that we have 100% certified knowledge of this, but if we do a number of studies in minimum wage and we all find that, they have the demand curve for labor is relatively inelastic, then we could, I guess I could change what we might view as like as maximizing social welfare, right? So if the demand curve for labor is very inelastic, then it could, in theory, be the case that increasing minimum wage, at least in the short term, could have quite a bit of benefits to people at lower cost.
Right, but you could also deduce the opposite, right? Like if you could, So
well, I don't. Can we deduce how elastic the demand curve for labor is?
The claim. No, you can guess at it, and you can get relatively close to what it is likely to be. But again, you never know for certainty. You don't even know for certainty, even whilst looking in the past, whether or not that is the reason that thing happened, right? Like we can come up with all of this data on, effects of the price of potatoes in Atlantis, but all we have discovered is the price of potatoes in Atlantis. We haven't actually discovered via empirics anything that is by default true about similar situations in other economic areas. Like, again, you can, through empirics, discover true things, right? But in order to discover true things through empirics, you need to be able to isolate variables, right? So, again, you cannot isolate variables in an economy because value is subjective, right? There is no such thing as an inherent value to any one commodity, good, or service. It's held at an individual level. And then, of course, it changes over time, right? And we don't have an evenly rotating economy. And then we have all of the unknown factors that obviously change behavior, such as a new war or an asteroid or a housing crisis somewhere else, or, a new diamond mine gets discovered in Colorado, right? Like you also can't predict the future and what all of those actions will entail, right? So you can't actually know anything from an empirical model.
I mean, I think we can get, again, probabilistic outcomes. Like if we saw during Trump's first term, he imposed, tariffs on China, and then we saw exchange rates appreciated against China. Like we could do a multivariable regression.
Right. Like you can look at it. You can do regression analysis, right? But again, that depends on how you do it. So minimum wage is another great example of that, where the data that they used to use and the way that they used to look at minimum wage. They didn't call it minimum wage. What do they call it?
A price floor, wage.
No, it was called youth employment or something. Was the technical term, like up until like the mid 90s. And so when you look at that, the way that they used to do it is they used to compare like cities to the best of their ability, right? So they compare New York with Chicago, and then track what happened when a minimum wage increase occurred in New York, and then compare it to Chicago because they had similar demographics. Now what they do is they try and utilize nearby regions, right, to see if there's bleed over and effect in a nearby region, because they're more concerned that the culture will be the same. But they sacrifice the accuracy of similar demographics and economics for something that is similar in other ways, right? And that's fine, you know what I mean? Those are just two different models of doing things, but they capture different things, and they capture other unknown variables. But again, you can discover true things with empirics, but they're not true because of the discovery, right? They were true inherently before they were always true.
Before we observe it, sure.
Either of right. So it's I don't disagree that you can use empirics to make good guesses, right? What I'm saying is that you can't know things through empirics unless you're capable of isolating all variables. And even then, technically speaking, that gets into kind of the metaphysics of are you an objectivist atheist, or You know what I mean? Or are you a little bit more lefty in your leanings in determining whether or not you can ever truly know anything? I would lean towards the prospect that you can truly know things, that they aren't simply wrong just because other things prove them to be wrong, but they were right in that domain, and now you've kind of entered a new domain, right? Like kind of like looking at, let's say, Newtonian versus Einstein physics, right? Like Einsteinian physics doesn't necessarily prove Newtonian physics incorrect. It's just that we've expanded the domains of our knowledge so that we understand that, like, yeah, Newtonian physics work in this area, mass of gravity, right? Whereas like Einsteinian physics work in different domains, if that makes sense.
I don't fully disagree. I would just say, I think empirics would still have value there, because if we were able to observe like how elastic the demand curve for labor is, we could determine like if it is socially optimal to have a minimum wage or not. I also think it'd be valuable to be able to determine like what theories have more or less weight, or it's like the peak on the Laffer curve, like where that is. I think that's a place where these where these models can be effective, can provide value. And then I would also, again, just like back to the theory thing, like it seems like you're gonna hate me for this. Okay, I'm matching my conviction to my level of knowledge here. Okay, from my reading. Okay, it seems like Austrian business cycle should give us a like relatively like testable hypothesis of like a boom should have some prediction of how big the recession is, versus like a more like Chicago school plucking model would be like a recession should have some impact on how fast the recovery is. And it seems like to me this hypothesis should be testable either way, and like we can observe this and we can do like a regression and observe like it seems like there is some relationship between recessions being able to predict the speed how big a recovery is, whereas there isn't really any relationship between how big a boom is and how big a recession is.
Right. Well, the problem with the Austrian business cycle as a testable hypothesis is twofold. Number one, nobody has a capitalist economy, right? I mean, like we get really, really close in like Honduras, Prospera, but like even they pay a tax to Honduras, right? So that is kind of like a free market economy, and so when we talk about, capitalism or capitalistic economies, we're talking about mixed market economies, right? Like even America, which is one of the most capitalist nations in the world, right? Like we have our train industry is partially nationalized, right? We have massive amounts of regulations. We have the Food and Drug Administration. We don't have a free market in food or drugs. We don't have a free market in housing. There's housing regulations out of the wazoo. Like there's so many regulations and things of that nature that like when you're a term like just because something is logically true in a free market, right, that doesn't necessarily mean that is logically true in a mixed market economy where there are all of these other multitude of factors that have the capacity to step in, right? Like we just don't have a free market, right? I mean, like, you admit that. We have a mixed market economy.
I agree. Basically, every country is mixed market with very few exceptions, and most of the exceptions are probably more command economy than they are libertarian.
Yeah. Like literally, Prospera Honduras is like I think probably the only one, and even that one isn't perfectly capitalist because they still pay taxes.
Yeah, I guess I just to me, it's going to bring up a whole other thing. It feels like that theory then is basically unfalsifiable, which seems like a bit of an issue. And we can now we're going to get into whether empirics is falsifiable. But
right. So ask yourself, like, what does falsifiable mean?
Can be proven wrong by more either like evidence or observations, or I guess theory could in theory prove it wrong, but.
So evidence and observations is what is required for falsifiability? What if something is not logically sound?
Well,
do you need evidence if it's not logically sound?
No, sure. You could have a logically unsound argument or invalid argument, sure.
Right. So if something is derived purely from logic, how would you go about it in testing whether or not it is true or false?
You would try to find one of the... one way you could do it, you could either find a way that the conclusion doesn't follow from the premises, or you could say one of the premises is unsound. But it seems to me intuitive that we could say one of the premises is unsound based on empirical evidence. But
how could you do that?
Well, if one of the I'm not aware of the exact way you deduce the human axiom.
So you admitted earlier, right, that like your uncle could have a different name. You're
Sure.
really fucking sure that he doesn't have another name, right? Like you're like 99.9% or 99.9999% sure of his name. But
Yeah,
you
probably.
recognize that your ability to ascertain truth via empirics is not perfect.
I don't disagree.
So
Again, it's all probabilities.
falsify
Sure.
You can't falsify something via empirical evidence. It's every claim is unfalsifiable.
Well, we could
Because
find empirical evidence that
There's no such thing as a there's no such thing as a falsifiable claim that you test via empirics, because you can never actually know with perfect certainty that whatever it is that you are doing to test it is isolated. You're only observing through time whatever experimentation that you're running. You could again, it's a hotshot fallacy, right? Like I could test your claim 10,000 times and it's true or false like perfectly true 10,000 times. There's still an ever so slight chance that it's false, right? And vice versa. I could prove it false 10,000 times and there would still be an ever so slight chance that it's true. So like this kind of like Popper's kind of revolution in falsifiability via empirics is not in and of itself logically sound, which is the primary means by which you would determine whether or not something is true or false, is going to be whether or not it is logically true or false first, right? And if it's not logically true, I don't need any other evidence to try and come to some probabilistic understanding of whether or not it is true. If someone says A equals not A, for example, right? They violate the law of identity. I don't need to test it in a lab to determine whether or not what they said is true or untrue, because they've already violated the law of identity. They have claimed a contradiction is true in reality. And so I just automatically know that they're wrong without having to go to the evidence. The empirics and the evidence is to survive in this world. We gain a corpus of knowledge of probabilities of things that are true. And then we build upon those things.
I guess
sometimes paradigm shifts happen.
I don't know if I see as big of a problem with like knowledge being probabilistic as you do. Like I would agree, like all this knowledge is probabilistic. We can have, I'm more certain of my uncle's name than I am certain of the fact that tariffs cause exchange rate appreciation, but I'm still relatively certain that broad tariffs cause exchange rate appreciation.
I am too.
Well, we agree on that point, but
well, no, I think I only have an issue when you claim to know something is true based purely off of empirics, number one, or when you value empirics. And when I say you, I mean one. I don't necessarily mean
sure,
specifically, right? Like when one says, I know this is true, especially about something like economics, right? Because of this empiric evidence, it's like you're doing silly talk, right? Like the right thing to say that isn't logically nonsensical is, we've tested this a bunch of times and it seems like this seems to be the pattern. So I'm going to assume that this is true because all the best evidence points to this being true. That's a perfectly valid claim, and it is almost certainly a true claim, right? Is that, all of the best evidence points in this direction. And the models that we've developed and multiple other models have been put out there, and people have tried to disprove this with other models and other data, and it comes in true basically every time. So we're pretty fucking certain that this will happen, right? That's a perfectly valid economic claim. What's wrong is when people say that it is true. But I think that's the first crux of the problem of how the left often talks about economics. When I say the left, I'm also including many Republicans in this as well. Right?
Sure.
The government intervention socialist. We're going to fix the market economy with our central planning, which is not necessarily unique to the Democrats or anything. That's kind of the first problem. It's like once we get past that and we have an understanding, then you can kind of move into the problems that are built from the original problem. the philosophical foundation.
Yeah, we can talk a little bit more about that, but I guess like most of the time when I make claims about these things, I'm referring to probabilistic outcomes. I'm not saying I know 100% that tariffs are going to fall more on the consumer than on China or whatever. I'm just saying probabilistically, it seems like there's a good chance that when we implement these tariffs, they're going to fall more on the consumers in America than they are in China through reducing export prices. I just don't.
Yeah, it's like when someone says women do this, and then someone shows up and is like, not all. It's like it's a generalization. Right? I'm not saying literally every fucking woman does this, right? I'm just saying like, hey, tariffs do this, and it's fine. It's okay, right? That is a kind of a problem just with our language in general, right? Like we have to compress our language. Can't necessarily be perfectly philosophically accurate when colloquially speaking.
Yeah, I guess there's this isn't an area that I've done a ton of reading, just because usually when I go to conversations with people, we're both approaching it from like the same framework. So I'm like relatively neutral on this, but I'll say I'm
willing to engage in internal critiques. It's fine.
No, sure. All I'm saying is I'm not convinced that you can fully logically deduce human action, and I'm not convinced that synthetic a priori claims really makes sense. I'm not convinced of those two things, but like I haven't done a ton of reading on them, so I'm relatively neutral on that.
Okay, so let's start with one. You cannot logically deduce human behavior.
I'm not convinced that you can logically deduce the human axiom.
Okay, and which of the axioms? So starting off, we want to start off with man acts rationally. Do you have an issue with that? That every action that man takes is rational?
I don't know if I necessarily have an issue with that, but I don't know if you can deduce that from the laws of logic.
Okay, so you're saying that from the laws of logic, you're not sure that we can deduce that man acts? Sure, you could say it depends. I mean, if you were to if we were to play funny with like the words, right, and we were to say man in this regard, and then we were to include individuals that weren't conscious beings, I guess you could say that, right? But the logical throughput here is, the axioms that undergird that, if you will, right, is that humans are conscious creatures. I think we can.
I would accept that. And again, that, I don't really disagree with the premise that humans act rationally or even that humans act with intent towards a goal, although I have some complicated beliefs on free will.
Human action is an axiom, right? It's not logically deduced starting from.
Well, I thought
human action is an axiom, right? So it's like, if humans act rationally, here we go, right? So the question is there any way to dispose of that action, of that? Right? It's very similar to existence exists, right? Ayn Rand's unavoidable axiom, right? Because to argue against existence is impossible, right? Because if you're arguing against your own existence, you're doing so within an existence where you wish for someone to believe that what you're saying is true, or at the very least performing in an existence, right? So how does one avoid the axiom that existence exists? Similarly, how does one avoid the axiom of human action, which is that man acts according to his will? Is there a way for you to act in discordance with that, right? Like you have a desire, like how would one do so? How would you argue? Because the very process of arguing would be a rational action based upon your own will, right? You could not formulate an argument without recognizing that in order to do so, that man must act in accordance with the will, that they can't, like, I mean, unless someone shoots you with like a robot gun, right? Like, but then you are being controlled and coerced in some way, right? You have lost your capacity to actually act on your own.
I mean, I would agree again with like the premise that, or the axiom that, like, at least in the short term, humans act rationally according to their will. I'm fine with accepting that, but my understanding is that there was some way, like a lot of Austrians would try to deduce this from like the basic laws of logic and it wasn't just a like accepted axiom. I thought they actually tried to deduce it. Maybe that was my misunderstanding though.
I mean, you're going to find a lot of people doing a lot of things in that regard, right? I don't really I feel like I'm already in a conversation that's like deep and heady. So I don't know that I want to start with existence exists, the three laws of logic, then Habermas's performative contradiction, and then, engage in argumentation ethics as put out by the primer and, the latest primer, 96, I believe, by Hans Hermann Hoppe, and then get into a theory of conflict and like deduce all, like there is a way to deduce the non-aggression principle from logically speaking. And then there is a way to deduce, justifiability of conflict avoidance in terms of ethical systems and frameworks. And then from those things, you can then kind of like undergird a necessity for human action. I think it's way easier to just say, in order to it is an axiom, take the axiom or don't take the axiom. If you choose to avoid the axiom, in what fucking way are you going to make an argument that man doesn't act according to his will? Like you can say it's deterministic, right? You can be a determinist and say that they lacks that choice. But like even if you are a determinist in that regard, there is still a desire or will coming from that individual that they are acting upon. There is just this claim that the chemical processes in your brain, etc., of like the precursors to that have created that desire or that will to begin with anyways. And so it's like, we can get into the debate of free will versus that in that regard, but either way, the outcome is still the same, right? Because like the argument of the determinist and the argument of the person saying man acts rationally are both saying that they have a will and they act in accordance with their will and desires. The determinist would just say that those will and desires are shaped by nature, and chemicals and the long chain of events that led up to it.
Yeah, sure. I would agree. Humans will only ever do things because they want to or because they are forced to. I would agree. They act in accordance with their will. But I guess like my point there is just if you're like claiming to know something as like a law of logic, you shouldn't just do like the accept the axiom or reject it. And if you reject it, there's the intellectual price tag of doing that. It's just if you're saying you know something, in your sense of knowing, then you should be able to logically deduce it. And maybe you can do that.
Well,
from what I've read, I'm not
the
convinced that you can do that.
Is by negation. And pretty much every philosopher would agree that by negation, we know truth, with the exception of Hegel. But I mean, Hegel denies the existence of reality and attempts to square that as a rational argument. It's simply not. But nevertheless, but I'm just, steel manning to the best of my ability. Yes, Hegel is the only, Hegelians are the only ones that deny that humans act rationally based off of their desire. But there is no logical justification for it. I mean, other than the primacy of consciousness, and the primacy of consciousness is circular logic, whereas existence exists is an unavoidable axiom. Where the primacy of consciousness it's true because I say so. Right?
Sure.
Whereas the logic of the existence exists is an unavoidable axiom, or that man acts rationally, it's true because it's not possible to argue that it is untrue. It's impossible to do so.
I guess
to do so becomes a contradiction.
When you say by negation,
That's not where I thought this was going. By the way, I thought we were going to mostly talking about tariffs.
We can talk about that in a second, sure. No, I didn't have any structure for this or anything. I was just, and again, I'm like relatively neutral in this. These are things I'm just not convinced of. So when you say it's proved by negation, you're saying that that is a deduction though, right? You're saying you can deduce it from the laws of logic by negation, right? So that is
yeah. That's why it's an unavoidable axiom.
Okay.
Theory of human action and existence exists are both unavoidable axioms.
Hold on, I'm writing that down so I can read more about it later. Okay.
yeah, check it out.
Okay. So there's another thing I'm not convinced of, which is the a priori synthetic claims. It seems like I think you might have heard this example before. Like, Kant said Euclidean geometry, what's like a systemic a priori or a synthetic a priori claim, and then I think we found out that's not really true. The universe is curved or whatever the fuck. So I'm not convinced of these claims, but I'm open to looking at it.
Okay. So which I'm trying to think like where I want to go with this. I don't know that I want to get into methodological interventionism. Okay, so you're not convinced that an a priori synthetic claim can be true,
basically
or that it is true. Okay, but I mean, one could make one that is untrue, right?
Sure, I guess. Oh, you're gonna say,
right?
Yeah.
Well, so why could they not make a claim that is true? Why is that not possible? I'm confused.
Here, I shouldn't say it should. I shouldn't say it precludes the possibility of it being true. I think it's possible that it is true, but I don't know. I guess I'm not convinced that they can be proven true without more reasoning behind it, without empirical observations. Does that work better?
Okay, right. So just for the record, right? We're getting into Kant, which isn't really anything to do with libertarianism. Right, like the synthetic claim here, at least from, I guess, Kant's perspective, would be if A, then B, in terms of economic models. So that's kind of like what you're saying, going back to the minimum wage claim, if a price floor is increased, then B. You're saying you're not sure that whether or not that can be proven logically true, that you would need empirics in order to determine whether or not that is.
I mean, I would say
itself.
I would say if the empirics observe that that isn't true, then the a priori synthetic claim is probably false.
Probably is doing a lot of work there, right? Probably is carrying over the fact that
I mean, we can know with X% certainty, X% high of certainty that it is false.
Right. So, but that's the issue. Is so when we stick with if we assume that human action is true as an axiom, right? Because it's an unavoidable axiom. And then let's say we move into minimum wage, right? So man acts rationally according to his will. And so a man is going to trade goods and services, based upon the subjective theory of value, right? So we can logically know that if man acts according to his own will, we know that if I have $10 and you have a widget and you want my $10, you value $10 higher than you value the widget, right? And vice versa. If I value the widget more than my $10, all things being equal, right? So it's there isn't a trust issue here.
Yeah, sure.
There isn't
Ceteris paribus, yep.
I don't. Right. You don't value it $9.99, but you devalue the physical act of lifting your arm at more than 1 cent. Therefore, you don't make the trade, right? But all other things being equal, that the trade will occur because of the subjective theory of value, right? So that is an a priori, or at least from Kant's perspective, that would be an a priori synthetic claim. Right.
Well, I guess
I can know that is logically true because I know the preceding things are true.
If we're capable of observing human action, and we observe that an increase in the minimum wage doesn't lead to any increase in unemployment, I'm not saying studies show that. I haven't looked into it too much. But if we observe that this doesn't in fact happen, I think that observation of human behavior probably means more. They probably took a misstep somewhere in the logic of trying to deduce this stuff.
Well, no, I don't disagree, right? I don't disagree that you can utilize empirics as a means to question the logic. But the problem is that the empirics don't prove the logic false. Right? They just,
Well,
if you believe something to be logically true, right? And it is and there's like a contradiction in reality. Right, which is to say that like it's always false every time you check.
I was going to say we could probably prove a contradiction.
Well, you can't prove a contradiction, but you certainly
Well, I
might
mean,
want to reevaluate.
sure, yeah.
Right, you certainly are going to want to reevaluate your logic there, right? Because it is also true that people could believe something is logically true, but it's not logically true because there's been some fault in their logic, right? I mean, Francisco d'Anconia or Ayn Rand or, all of the other people within Atlas Shrugged, right? Like, contradictions don't exist in reality. If you believe that you have discovered one, check your premises. You will find that one of them is false, right? So it's like, if empirical evidence is suggesting over and over and over and over again, something that ought be logically true according to your thinking, and it turns out to be and it turns out over and over and over again that it's shown to not be true in practice or in theory, then something is potentially wrong with your logic, right?
Yeah.
You can guess that. You can go like, man, something's pointing to like maybe I missed something, because human logic is infallible, but humans' ability to adequately determine whether or not something is or isn't logical is fallible.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
It's kind of the same thing when like Thomas Aquinas talked about, contradictions between reality and the Bible. Right, it's like in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, or logos. Right, like the breath of life, logos, the capacity for reason was gifted to man, and so if there's a contradiction between the Bible, which is presumably the Word of God, I'm an atheist for the record, but I'm just utilizing the argument for argument's sake. Right, if the Word of God is infallible, and you go out and you discover something with science, right? Well, then either your scientific method is incorrect, your data is incorrect, or your interpretation of the Word of God is incorrect. It doesn't mean that the Word of God, at least as far as he's concerned, is actually fallible. It just means that you had some incorrect interpretation about what the message of the Scripture was supposed to convey, et cetera, right? Similarly, you could say the same thing about logic here, right? Which is, just because I believe something to be logically true doesn't necessarily mean that it is. It is true or false, independent of my belief in its truism or its falsity, right? So I mean, like, I don't disagree that it's valuable, as you keep saying, right? To take empirical evidence, and when the empirical evidence stacks up over and over again, to challenge our presumptions, right? And to look and see, like, well, what's going on here? Because one of these is missing something. Either the empirics is like missing variables and data and things that we can't track, and we should look for it, or vice versa. It's the logic.
I guess okay. Here's the issue: is I mean, I haven't talked to like many Austrians, but it seems like, for example, like when I brought up the Austrian business cycle theory, we kind of just try to find I don't want to call them excuses, is a harsh word, but we try to find reasons why the empiricism is more flawed, and we don't like try to challenge the logic as often. Like, it seems like there are these testable outcomes that these theories would predict, and it just seems like people try to resort to sort of, I mean, you resort to the fact that like we're a mixed market, which I agree, we are a mixed market, but I don't see a reason why the fact that it is true that the size of a boom doesn't really predict a recession, but the size of a recession does somewhat predict the size of a boom. That even though we are a mixed market and not a totally free market, that shouldn't at least cause us to reevaluate things, especially when other models show that the plucking model or other like post-Keynesian business cycle theories seem to be more accurate.
Again, it's if you have a model with some level of predictability, probabilistically speaking, and you seem to see a pattern emerge from your model, right? And that model contradicts something that you've logically deduced purely from logic, okay? It is true that one of them is wrong. That is true, right? One of them is wrong. We can agree to that, right?
Sure.
Either the model's predictions are incorrect, or the logic is incorrect. Okay.
Sure.
Now,
yeah.
but if you attempt to use the empirics as proof that the logic is incorrect, then you have made a grave mistake in your thinking. You've now moved into the realm of irrationality, of non-thinking, of non-reasoning, right? If you instead say, I challenge the logic because I'm seeing all of this evidence that what it is that you are claiming, logically speaking, is untrue, right? It's perfectly fine to then go back and review the logic and see if you can find any weakness or any flaws or any things that there are different variables that could explain why there's a leap in the logic, right? Like we say A equals C and you're like, but there's this B variable that hasn't been accounted for. There was a logical leap from one to the other. But if you can't find a logical leap in it from one to the other, then you haven't proven it false, right? You've just proven that either one of these two things is false. Empirics cannot prove logic false. That's just not like it. That's just like a complete category error. They're like two different ways of knowing. Logic is one that if your logic is true, it is true. It cannot be. You cannot have something deduced from logic that is false whilst the logic holds it true. There's a flaw in the logic, or it simply is true. You cannot use observable data to prove logic false. It's just not possible.
I mean, I don't fully disagree that we can't use it to, prove it false. Like, obviously, if the logic is true, I would agree, like, logically, it's true. One of these things have to be false. Right. But like if I guess like if we have like a few different models that show that like this Austrian business cycle theory like clearly lacks explanatory power, but we can drop a model like a post Keynesian business cycle theory, and it does seem to have more explanatory power. Even if maybe the Austrian business cycle only applies in a total free market, like why would I not at least put more weight in the post-Keynesian business cycle theory in predicting the future than I would the Austrian business cycle theory?
Well, no, I didn't say that the hold on, pause. I just want to be very clear. I didn't say that it must be in a perfectly free market. I'm simply saying that if it is predictive of the human behavior, but if you interrupt and you stop the market from behaving according to the principles of people, according to the desire and wishes of people, you're going to get some form of different outcomes. Now, let's give an example, right? So let's say the Federal Reserve during a bust, right, engages in quantitative easing, right? They purchase up a bunch of assets as a mean to create asset inflation, right? And to like remove.
Usually it's to change long-term interest rates, right? That's my understanding. But sometimes, it's used to stabilize asset prices, but sure. Okay.
Well, right. I think because is probably the wrong way there. I just mean like that obviously causes asset inflation.
Sure, it does. Yeah, sure.
I didn't mean to say like that was the logic behind it, right?
Yeah.
So and then you apply and then you go, oh well, we came up with this model, and this model it seems to be more predictive than the Austrian business cycle. It's like, well, is your model what is your model capturing? Your model cannot capture all details, right? Like your model is leaving data out, and one of those data points might be that inflation, for example, that is held up in one form or another, doesn't necessarily instantaneously hit the market. You know what I'm saying? Like it
sure, yeah.
It takes time. It takes time for different inflationary actions to necessarily balance within the market. So just
sure. Like obviously, whoever you give the money to first.
Right. So it's like we might measure a boom and bust with one model, right? And go, well, it seems the boom was actually better than the bust in this 4-year period where there was a 2-year boom and there was a 2-year bust, right? But the problem is like, what is the bust portion of like inflation that's just kind of sitting out there somewhere, right? It hasn't the market hasn't necessarily adequately, like our models for understanding what the inflation is by like looking at the consumer price index and looking at all these different indexes are always missing data, right? So for example, we look at CPI. There's like a calculation, I think it's like 7% for assuming an increase in quality of goods, right? Because, a car made in 1990 is not the exact same car made in 2024, right? Like the car is safer in 2024. The car can probably has better acceleration. It gets better gas mileage. It has different features, right? So you can't really compare a car in 1990 to a car in 2024 and be like, well, this is the inflation of cars because we're not actually measuring quality. So we kind of try and guess quality.
Yeah, we do the hedonic adjustments. Yep. Yeah.
Right, but quality is a subjective assessment, right? Some people really like gizmos in their car. Some people don't like gizmos in their car. Some people like gizmos in their car during the summer because they like having the windows down and blasting the radio, and they like a better radio, but they don't necessarily care about it so much when they purchase a car in winter because the windows are going to be rolled up, and so you don't actually need as nice of a stereo system. So all of these things change over time, and they change at an individual level. So we guess inflation. We don't know what the inflation rate is. I mean, we just kind of utilize a bunch of things to determine kind of what it is. At the same time, Kraft mac and cheese in 1990 didn't used to be full of a bunch of poisonous ingredients. But Kraft mac and cheese in 2024 has got like yellow dye and a whole bunch of other preservatives in it that like didn't exist before. Now, you might say that that's, that they're still relatively similar products, but I don't think it would be a controversial claim to say that Kraft mac and cheese's quality of ingredients has gone down, whilst potentially the manufacturing and, shipping, et cetera, of the product has increased in capacity, right? So it's easier to ship Kraft mac and cheese around, et cetera. So there are all of these variables that are impossible to measure because they're based upon value, which is subjective. So it's like the idea that you have a model that is not based in logic and you utilize the predictability of said model, and then you go, well, I looked at these other measurable things, except they're not perfectly measurable. They're other forms of guesses about what is occurring, and then going, but my model seems more predictive than your model based off of the data that we are using that is imperfect and we know is imperfect and doesn't actually adequately track price. It's fine to look at your model and say, hey, my model seems to have some level of predictability, but to utilize that to say that it's better than another model that is based purely off of logic, and you can't defeat the logic of it, or you can, maybe you can, that's totally different, right? But if you can't defeat the logic of it, then what you're really showing is my model works with my fucked up collection of data, and not my model is more predictive, right? Like you're missing data, right? Again, contradictions don't exist in reality, right? If it is logically true, then it is true, period. There's no amount of data or evidence that can point towards it being untrue that makes it untrue. It simply is true because it's true.
Sure. So, I mean, I agree. Like, listen, I'm no fan of CPI, okay? But I agree, like, again, we can't know all of these things 100%. Like, it's probabilistic, and like different inflation measures track different things. And to some extent, value is subjected. But I think they try to account for like how much quality changes affect the price. So they're trying to account for like, they're looking at the price, which is how much everyone as an aggregate subjectively values these things. So I think that's how they account for that. But I guess
yeah, I mean, they try. I mean, like it's like I don't begrudge Chicago School or any other economists attempting to try and understand things by looking for patterns and data and trying to get the data as close as possible as we can, right? But I mean, like, it's the same reason that the economic calculation problem exists. It's the same reason why central planning can't compete with the market, is because the attempt to discover information costs money.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
The attempt to discover price and potential future price costs money, and the more you try to get more and more accurate, the more money and the more resources it costs to ascertain that data. And you kind of do like a risk benefit analysis, right? Where after a certain point, you're not going to, because like if we wanted to know inflation of Kraft mac and cheese, right? We could take literally 90% of all of the funds that every single human being in America makes, and we could devote it towards this problem. And we would get way fucking closer in understanding Kraft mac and cheese and the price changes. We would have way, way, way better data because we spent trillions of dollars to discover this question, right? But what would be the trade-off? And the trade-off would be like economic ruin and collapse and like all of the social services that we use being dried up and like, a market that doesn't like it would be disastrous. It would be like apocalyptic, right? So like we go, well, how much money, how much are we willing to spend to discover knowledge in this domain? But we ought understand that knowledge is imperfect knowledge.
Hey, listen, tell that to all the MAGA people who defend tariffs and tell them that the government does not have the information required to know what jobs should be here and what jobs should be overseas.
You think I don't, brother? Like I shit on MAGA for the tariffs all the fucking time. I find that both the left and the right have pieces of the truth when it comes to tariffs, and they lean in really hard to like their pieces of the truth. Just from a logical perspective, right? Not like from an empirics-based perspective, but just there are things that can be logically deduced as true from praxeology, and like people only take portions of that. So like I hear from the right all the time, oh, well, China pays for it. And then I hear the left go, no, they fucking don't. The American importer pays for it. And it's like, well, both are fucking true, obviously.
Yeah, there's some incidents on both, yeah.
Well, like, obviously, technically speaking, the person who pays the import tax is the person that is importing it, right? But China pays in the sense that there's a supply and demand equation. And if I'm selling things and all of a sudden they become more expensive to sell them, then all of a sudden you have incentivized by artificially increasing the price of a good that it comes from an outside region. You have incentivized new players to come into the market because of the higher price, and therefore you're going to have this supply and demand situation where there is internal supply at a lower price, and either China is going to have to figure out how to lower its prices and to be able to compete, or they're going to have to figure out where to sell it elsewhere, right? Like that is, or they're going to have to cut manufacturing. But in all of these instances, they pay for the tariff, and we pay for the tariff. We all fucking pay for the tariff.
I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, I agree with that, and I point it out to people as much as possible. I just like, obviously, I think there are quite a few people out there who like literally believe that China is somehow paying money to the U.S. Treasury, or that like U.S. consumers bear literally none of the burden of the tax because China subsidizes 100% of the export cost. And again, I do think this is an area.
There are definitely people that believe that. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And this is an area again where I think empirics are probably useful for trying to determine how big the incidence is on either country. Do we agree empirics could be used here at least? Because this is an area where I do cite empirics quite a bit.
Well, I think I would go further even than that, which I think, empirical evidence is perfectly fine for attempting to guess, right? It's only when you make a truth claim based off of empirics that it becomes problematic, right? Like what you can use the logic, right, of the theory of human action in regards to individuals being rational and looking at what pressures exist, but trying to guess what those pressures will be in an economy that's constantly changing is an impossibility to guess with any certainty, right? But we absolutely can look at and should look at previous data, to the best of our ability to try and determine what the potential backblow is going to be from these things. But again, it's just so long as you're not making a truth claim, it's fine. Who cares?
Okay,
yes,
sure.
Give me the data. Let's try and figure it out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, great. I guess Okay, without I don't want to retract the whole empiric conversation about the whole truth claim stuff. So I'm curious, what did you want to talk to about tariffs then, or what did you expect to be talking about tariffs?
I have to go. I mean, I would just assume that's where the conversation would naturally flow because that was the inception of the conversation.
Yeah.
But I was willing to be a springboard about it. One of the things that's like, so tariffs are bad, right? Tariffs harm. Everyone is harmed by tariffs to some degree. Right?
Yeah.
We don't know what that degree is, but we know that everyone pays a price for the tariff. The consumer pays a price. The producer pays a price. Even the manufacturer, who logically pays the least price, right, which is the individual that goes into a market because the price has been artificially raised, that wouldn't have gone into the market, and or the individual that ups production because the raise of the price has made their goods more competitive, right? So like their widgets, we put a tariff on widgets, in Americans that aren't utilizing the tariff, right? Well, they're paying tariffs on whatever it costs to produce the widgets, right?
Yeah.
But if the widget itself also has a tariff, right, then there are some people who will enter the market and begin manufacturing in America as opposed to other countries, because of the fact that the price has been artificially raised. And then there are people who are already producing the widgets who can now, up their manufacturing or, potentially increase their price even, so that they can make larger profit, right? Obviously, in situations like this, it's almost certain that the business would be better off decreasing price, right, so that they can increase rate of profit, so that that would probably be the best business decision for most individuals there. But I mean, again, it depends on the good and the goods that we're talking about, right? The problem that I have with many people's understanding of tariffs especially is understanding if we're in a trade war. And we kind of already are in a trade war with China and Europe on many goods and many services. Yeah. And so tariffs can absolutely, and I don't think Trump talks about this way at all. And neither does J.D. Vance, but J.D. Vance writings do, which is very interesting. So it's something that I think Trump and J.D. Vance sold this more to the stupidity of the voter base, in very, very simplified terms, because they know that most people aren't going to understand tariffs no matter what, right? Left,
yeah,
right,
and people have the zero sum bias and anti-foreign bias, and like all those biases both go along great with tariffs. So
right. So it's like I do think there is some merit to utilizing tariffs as a tool. I wouldn't say it's justifiable. I'm a fucking libertarian and an ANCAP, right? Like,
sure, yeah.
Do this. But nevertheless, like for example, car manufacturing. Almost every European country has tariffs on American-made cars, and we don't. Well, this was set up after World War II to help their domestic manufacturing and allow them to be able to export things. Well, it's like, okay, well, why the fuck didn't we do something about this? I don't know, in the 1970s when like Detroit was fucking, and Detroit, Michigan steel was being a problem, and when like car manufacturing was being shipped to China and Mexico, and when we were like, utilizing, moving manufacturing down south where like union labor laws were less stringent, right? Like we were having, since the 70s, we have been having a collapsing manufacturing industry in cars, and yet during that entire process, Europe has been like, we will sell you our BMWs, we will sell you our German cars, but we will not buy yours, but we'll artificially raise the price, right? Like this is not a friendly market in that regard. And so it's like, well, what if, Trump utilizes tariffs and then, I don't know, RFK and Trump go to Europe, right? And they go like, look, we'll fucking sell you, like you get rid of your meat tariffs, for example.
Yeah.
And we'll put in the same regulations that you already have in Europe on your meat, right? And then they sign a trade deal. So like tariffs can be utilized in the short term for a long-term gain economically towards free trade. But the concept that Trump has sold is a 100% lie. The idea that we can reduce income tax, we can reduce, wage taxes and corporate taxes, and that this will be taken over by tariffs and then also we're going to reduce spending. Well, it's like, okay, well, if the tariffs work, if the tariffs fucking work and they bring back domestic manufacturing, well, then over time we lose money on the tax that is the tariff. Okay.
Yeah.
And that means we either have to reduce spending or increase income wage taxes. Like we have to do one of those, right? I'm all for reducing spending, obviously. But you get what I'm saying? So like there is an absolute lie. But also, nobody talks about tariffs in that way with the left at all. Like they're just engaging in this surface level understanding of tariffs to like call out the lies of MAGA. And it's like, sure, but it's just like, is anybody on the left genuinely interested in like American prosperity and success and truth? Or are they more interested on dunking on the right? And I don't see a single like left-wing streamer or personality that is actually focused on like going forward and having truth and learning and like gaining for our country. They're more trying to get the dubs on the dumb righties for like audience capture and clout.
I would say we're probably all interested in American prosperity. It's just that we obviously have way different ideas of how to get there. I guess I would I kind of agree, especially like normie Democrats probably don't have that great of understanding of tariffs, and they'll just be like, oh, Trump won because he said he hates inflation, but tariffs are inflationary, which actually isn't even really true. Tariffs aren't really inflationary. They just lead to a one-time increase in the price level. They don't actually necessarily increase the rate of inflation.
Yeah, it depends on what you mean by inflation, right? Like you're talking about like, money's supply. Yeah, absolutely, you're right.
Yeah.
You're talking about like a classical definition of inflation. Yes, 100%.
Yeah, but I guess again, like something like the reason I was being mean to Pentuple on Twitter is because
I don't remember who it was. Yeah.
Yeah, it was because I feel like a lot of these people don't match their level of conviction with their level of knowledge. If you're making a claim like Democrats don't know what a tariff is, it's like, okay, well, like come on stream and like let's hash out who seems to have a better understanding of what a tariff is. And now we might disagree, like obviously you and I disagree on like the whole foundation for like how we should determine whether tariffs are good or bad, like whether empirics is more useful or when empirics is useful versus when praxeology is useful, and whether these things can be falsified. That's a more understandable disagreement than like if someone is just like tweeting out like you don't understand what a tariff is, but then you won't even talk to me about it.
We'll see.
Exact true for real. Hey, listen, some of them did. CTV was willing to talk to me. Okay, I'll give credit to CTV and you. You're here right now. Sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm fairly competent on my economic knowledge. Like I'm not like
clearly
or anything, but I mean, I feel like I have a decent understanding of economics, better than most, I guess, streamers.
Yeah, and I do think
it's not necessarily my area of expertise either, to be fair.
Yeah, the point you made that like tariffs can be used in a good way to reach the end result of free trade. Like I would agree with that. That comes up a lot in my tariff debates. People are like, oh, Trump is gonna just use these tariffs to negotiate. It's like,
Trust
well, I agree.
Yeah,
if he does do that, that's a good thing. But it's a good thing because the end result is free trade, which is what I want, right? Now, I am curious because you're libertarian ANCAP guy.
Go ahead.
Obviously, there are a lot of countries like the EU and like even in China, even more, that have different regulations that have different subsidize industries. And a common response is like, oh, well, why shouldn't we tariff these countries that are subsidizing their industries or have super weak labor regulations as unfair competition? I'm curious because you're a libertarian, what your response to that is.
Mm-hmm. I would say there's this really, really good book. It's an old book, but it's still a great book. It's called The Four Little Dragons. It's got a much longer title. It's an economic book about like Taiwan, Japan.
Oh,
Beijing,
sure. Yep.
And like how they engaged in market manipulation and anti-free trade policy, whilst the United States basically just let them do it in the aftermath of like I think maybe it was South Korea, but I can't remember exactly. But it's been a while since I've read it, but it's still a great book. And so there was a ton of market manipulation and anti-free trade kind of things, like, right. So the Chinese, for example, like the Japanese government, where did all these fucking Hondas come from, right? Like why does everyone drive a Toyota and a Honda in America, in like this small island nation, and like how did that happen when we had this massive car industry? One of the things that Japan did is they heavily subsidized the car industry, and they utilized a rebate system where they heavily subsidized car salesmen in America, right? So they would say, like, if you sell a Toyota, we'll give you $2,000. Just sell a Toyota, we'll give you $2,000. And so they were utilizing their tax base to essentially gain a market capture, because there is an understanding that there's a brand loyalty, right? That there's a price to getting into a market. And then once you're embedded in the market, you can get rid of those initial costs, right? And then people will continue to buy a Toyota or a Honda for their next vehicle, et cetera, because there's brand recognition, there's brand loyalty, et cetera, and it allows you to establish a foothold in those things. So it's like I don't know how I don't know exactly how I feel about it. It's kind of like I would have to look at it at an individual basis. Right, because I look at a trade war much the same way that I might have previously, before I was a full-blown libertarian, right, have looked at a real war, right, which is like, well, what is the goal here, right? Like, if you give me an action, I want a goal, right? Like when we look at like the Iraq invasion, right, it was like, we had this mission accomplished banner that was like so famous, but it was like, well, what was the goal of the the invasion in Iraq, right? It was, the stated goal was, Saddam Hussein at first. Okay, well, he had nothing to do with anything, really. You know what I mean? Like, we just...
Yeah.
Like, and then we were just there constantly. Like, the goal is to stabilize the region. Okay, well, how are we doing that? Did you guys not pay attention to Charlie Wilson's war? You know what I mean? Like, none of you read that fucking book? Clearly you didn't. So it's like, at an individual basis, I am fine with the state, I wouldn't say fine, because nothing that the state does is justified, right? But if we're in a trade war and they're going to make it illegal by, because they have a monopoly on power and violence in these trade regulations, right? Make it illegal for the businesses to engage in, in anti-free trade, et cetera, because they're using their violence in that regard. Well, then they've kind of taken up the responsibility of
fuck you, Bert Stein. What the hell? Yeah, I mean, I guess that was, obviously, I guess there were like two ways I expected you to view it. Like, cause like, obviously you would say it's bad for China even to like subsidize their export market, right? Like they're imposing on the non-aggression principle, right? So I was curious if you saw that as like justifying the U.S.
Well, I mean, the state is unjustified. You know what I mean? Like,
well, sure. If you agree the entire state is unjustified, you'd also think that the U.S., preventing us from buying exports from China is unjustified. But I guess it's your...
Yeah, I agree.
So, let's say, China subsidizes solar panels, for instance. Let's put aside the geopolitical concern of China being our enemy. Let's pretend like they're our ally. I'm sure the EU subsidizes stuff too.
We both put on our Henry Kissinger hat. We got
exactly. Yeah, China's our best global ally right now. I guess if they're like subsidizing solar panels, how do you feel? How do you feel about us like putting a tariff on solar panels if they're subsidizing them?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really complicated issue. I would say I would initially be comfortable with it. I don't think it's good that we buy solar panels from China. I also think solar panels are trash in general. It's also because it's not just China subsidizing solar panels, right? It's also the green energy, which is mostly run by oil companies. It's oil companies invested in solar, and the reason they're invested in solar is because it's the shittiest form of competition to their oil, right? I mean, like natural gas is better than solar, geothermal is better than solar, hydroelectric's better than solar.
Wait, what do you mean? What do you mean by better? I mean, one, I think the reason they're investing in it is because they get subsidies, and then two, I'm just curious what you mean by better.
Right? Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like this. What I think, like so for example, solar panels technically can last 30 years, but they get replaced roughly every 15 years because a lot of them break, but also because the increase in the innovation of a solar panel, like how much how much power it can gain per square inch, right, increases to such a degree that it becomes cheaper with the government subsidies and everything, right, to like repurchase them after 15 years. And then it's kind of like it constantly creates waste, right? So there's fucking dumps full of solar panels that are being replaced. These non-biodegradable kind of things that just become trash after a certain amount of time because they go into disrepair. And they require precious metals, right? So they require conflict minerals, that is, utilized slave labor in Africa and in other places. Some of it comes from North Korea. There are some South American companies and, Colorado, for example, some places where we're able to get some of those minerals to a small degree, right? But like in terms of the global, tech market and, manufacturing of tech products, right? It's just full of, like your cell phone, like hold up your cell phone. If it's not a Motorola, if it's a Motorola, it's good. Right?
Check this out.
If it's a fair phone. Yeah. So that one, right? Like mine doesn't, but yours does. Yours uses slave labor for cobalt. Now there are other metals in all of our fucking phones, even in the fair phones from Europe that are conflict metals, right? So there's all of those issues. But like, so when I say like, when you look at them in the long term, even with the current subsidies, nuclear, geothermal, and hydroelectric gets you more energy for the amount of funds that you spend on them, right?
Okay,
way more energy.
I mean,
way more efficient.
I would have to do more reading into this, but the graphs I've seen, barring any externalities from solar panels being dropped in dumpsters or whatever, and the mining, the graphs I've seen on fucking my Twitter feed, again, not a well-researched topic for me, is that the cost of the cost per kilowatt hour of solar has been going down significantly.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
It has been going down. It absolutely has been. And wind is the same way, right? Now, wind causes environmental problems. It's certain. It's not quite as bad, I guess, per se, as natural gas, and certainly not as bad as coal or petroleum. But comparing wind to like all of the other forms of quote unquote green energy, wind's a bad one. Like it does a lot of bad shit. Yeah. So I mean, like, but both of them have increased because you have tech increases in general, right? I mean, this is true of like basically everything, right? Like you get, CPU and battery power, like what's it like, kind of double every like what is it, 15 year? Not 15. I can't remember. Every 7 years. It plateaus, but it averages out, right? Like regardless, the tech gets better over time. And so solar will get better over time. But that's true of any other form of energy, right? Like
sure.
Nuclear, like how far away are we from, China recognizes this. China's investing in thorium salt reactors in terms of research and development. Like, why in the fuck are we letting China get ahead of us in research and development on what is potentially the greatest source of energy we have available to us currently? I mean, obviously, we could have a breakthrough in cold fusion and that would like change everything.
Yeah.
Barring that. Yeah.
I mean, I guess you're not going to find disagreement from me on nuclear energy. I think we should be, I wouldn't even be opposed to subsidizing nuclear energy to some extent, but,
well, you don't need to subsidize. Just get rid of unnecessary regulations. Like nuclear energy, like it can take like 2 years to like get a fucking permit to do certain things, right? Like the cost of nuclear is so fucking high because it is massively overregulated.
Sure, that could be true. Yeah, I mean, I would imagine it's true considering people, I think, are unjustifiably scared of it. But I guess barring externalities, we got so sidetracked. My question is just because this is one of the harder arguments that I deal with sometimes. If there is X country who's our ally or enemy, doesn't matter, that they're producing X good, and the reason they're better at it is because they're subsidizing it. Or I shouldn't even say better. The reason it's cheaper.
Like China's EV market.
Yeah, exactly. Is because we're subsidizing it. I'm curious because you're an ANCAP who would disagree with that subsidy, but also would probably disagree with the state being justified in doing anything here. What the appropriate response is to that.
Yeah, no, I said like, at an individual level, I have no problem with a tariff. I have a problem with it, right? But I kind of already explained the logic here, right?
Sure.
Which is that like we're not allowed, like the state has made it illegal for us to engage in like anti-competitive things in terms of like creating a cartel our own, right? And being like, we ban these things. Like we would be sued for that in certain courts and things of that nature. So the state has taken that responsibility. And in this regard, if they're stealing from other people to try and flood a market with cheaper goods that is only cheap because they have engaged in aggression in that regard, and the goal is to reduce aggression in terms of that, like in terms of that subsidy, and create a freer market, and that is the stated goal, and like it's within the law. Yeah, sure. I'll stand behind a law that says like, this is done until such a time that China gives up on this, right? Because it's a defensive tactic, right, against theft and fraud, right? A lot of what China does is theft and fraud. There's a whole thing. So, like intellectual property is another huge one, right? Like
they steal
China,
that. Yeah.
China rightly doesn't believe in IP, right?
Oh wait, I forgot. Yeah, you don't believe in IP either. Yeah.
Right, but it's like, but we're all engaging in a world like IP exists, right? And so like this would be where I would like separate from a conservative opinion on that, right? I would absolutely be vehemently against a new tax to try and force China into engaging in intellectual property laws, right? Because what you're saying is, I'm going to give you an aggressive tax on America so that I can force other people in other countries to engage in additional aggression. And then once they engage in that additional aggression, I promise to take away the extra aggression I gave you, right? Like, it's just bad all around as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was just curious
what my chat is giving me shit for the way I pronounce nuclear.
Oh, yeah, no, I had your chat open. I saw, didn't
Apparently
they say we
like
both?
Nuclear.
Yeah, I don't know.
Whatever.
Listen.
That's how we pronounce it in Virginia.
Yeah, my chat's used to my mispronunciations by now. But I was just curious what you thought of that, just because, again, it's, if you don't think any state action is justified, I was just curious for your opinion on that. I don't know. Is there anything else?
No, I'm pretty good, brother. I was just it's nice to meet you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Most of the time that I end up meeting like streamers in a debate scenario, it's like on some fucking panel somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's a terrible way to meet people. It's like always like, it's like, cause I'm just like, listen here, you dumb commie fuck. You know what I mean? Cause I got to get my point out. I'm like, I gotta make it quick, but you can have a little bit more charity in a 1v1.
Yeah. Hey, listen, I'm sure maybe we'll end up on the same panel someday. We might even end up taking the same side on some things, I'm sure, with the tariffs and with the, I'm generally a pretty free market guy.
I'm banned from a lot of places. I don't play nice with others.
Listen, I'll get there one day. That's the goal, right? It's the.
I've been on a bunch of panels. Like, it's like,
yeah.
It is what it is, brother. It was nice talking to you.
Absolutely.
If you have any questions or anything, or you're curious about libertarian perspective, both to your audience or just to you in general, Fabian Liberty on Twitter, Fabian or X. Stupid fuck. Fabian Liberty on X, not to be confused with XXX, and same thing with on YouTube. I'm on other platforms, but I'm really only streaming to YouTube currently.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Someone in my chat told me to get you to read Human Action. No lefty is going to read fucking Human Action. That is such a difficult fucking.
Listen, I will read excerpts of it. I'm sure, because it's probably mentioned. He will read the Wikipedia mentions and Googleable things. Exactly.
To argue against it.
Exactly.
Because he's already decided it's wrong.
Exactly. I will confirm my priors, and to do so, I will read excerpts of Human Action in debunks of Human Action. I'm sure I'll read a little bit more into the praxeology stuff. You did give me something to think about the human action axiom thing that I did. I took notes on. But yeah, I appreciate the conversation. I'm sure we can set some more stuff up in the future.
Yeah, my DMs are open, and there you go, brother. Nice meeting you.
Yeah, nice meeting you. Thanks.
Peace.
Peace out. Crazy. What's up?
Yo, what's up? Hey, how's it going?
Good. Did you watch the whole thing?
I think so. It wasn't long, right? It was like an hour.
No, yeah, it was only like an hour. I don't think I asked him. I mean, you just DM me like literally at the end, ask him if you think measurements mean anything in economics. At the beginning, we did kind of go over like, don't you think like if we agree that in principle, like a tariff could have the burden on either the country that's reducing their export prices.
No. But if he says that measurement means anything, like, look, Austrians contradict themselves so much. Okay.
Okay.
Like, if he says that measurement means anything in economics, show him this quote. Give me a second.
Is it just Demise's quote snipe where he says like,
yeah, I love quote sniping them.
The theory is not subject to falsification by evidence or whatever.
No. Literally, here he says.
In the field of praxeology, in the field of praxeology and economic, did he mean no sense?
In economics.
No sense can be given to the notion of measurement. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah. Or like, Austrians will like hate when you have aggregates, right? Like, GDP.
Yeah.
Consumption and whatnot. But then you read Rothbard and he has his own, like, what was it, like GPD or something? Gross private product or something. And that also is like, it's like GDP without the G. So it's like that also uses aggregates. But what are you doing? It's like, I don't know. A lot of these people. But either way, fun discussion. I'm not the biggest fan of Austrians. That's it. I gotta go though.
All right.
See you. Bye.
That was fun and not intolerable. Switch to this scene and this scene, and then close that, and then have this here. And then I can close that, and I can move this. I read that paper that had different estimates at a natural rate, but
oh, okay.
Yeah, they tried to estimate it 3 different ways, but
I mean, even there was a paper in NBR, which is funny. The paper was basically like saying, did I tell you about this? The paper was like, well, we find that, as the Federal Reserve manipulates interest rates, this eventually leads to an unsustainable, like, basically describing word for word, like, the Austrian business cycle theory and saying that they find evidence for it.
Yeah.
But they didn't cite anywhere. They didn't cite Mises. They didn't cite Hayek. They didn't cite Rothbard. Like, they did mention the word Austrian once. They didn't say anything. And Austrians on Twitter freaked out about this. And they, like, tagged the, like, NPR and was like, hey, why did you not mention Mises? It's like, awesome. But yeah.
The Fed tries to estimate the natural rate too, don't they? So.
Yeah, don't you need it for the Taylor rule? I think maybe.
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Give me a second. Let me look at the Taylor rule. Cool. 1 second.
Everything you're talking about is unprecedented with these tariffs. We don't fucking know what's going to happen. It is a major market disruptor. I mean, I don't know how much of the previous conversation you listened to. I think probabilistically we could have some understanding that these are going to appreciate exchange rates based on, based on studies that give us or observed evidence that gives us probabilistic knowledge.
Seems like you don't need the natural rate of interest. But it is.
Well, I think that I'm pretty sure they do try to estimate the neutral rate anyway. I think they say that like the neutral rate is. I'm pretty sure I've seen Powell talk about it.
Either way, it's important. It's important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Regardless, the flocking model debunks Austrian business cycle. Okay.
True.
That's right.
Yeah, you saw me mention that, right? Like, yeah.
Oh, I didn't. I joined in the middle.
Oh no, yeah, I mentioned. He said a few different. We said a few different things. Basically, I mentioned like from this logical deduction, we should get like some testable theories. Like, and it seems like the evidence says that this testable theory is not. It's not true. And I think there we move to like, well, one, we're all mixed market economies. We're not a Austrian business cycle is like free market economy, so it might not fully apply in mixed markets. And then like two, like if the logic is true. Then the theory would be false, right? Like one of these two things is
agree,
one of these.
The theory,
Yeah, I know.
Well, no,
Yeah.
if the logic is true, the theory is
Or sorry,
true.
if the
Well,
logic
if
is.
we look at the world,
Yeah.
yeah, if we look in the world and the theory is false, that means your logic is false. Great, you got it.
Well, but he's gonna say, how do you know the model isn't false, right? Like the.
Look around, bro. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you see, that's why this is like, you see how like insane that is, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like. I like I mean, I can understand where they're coming from, but like, like most, like any like normal person is gonna like look at this guy and he's like, oh, this guy literally does not accept evidence at all, and it's like,
Well, no. Also, look, I mean, you don't need evidence for mathematics, right? Like some mathematics things look unintuitive, but then we find out that they're true. Okay, cool.
Sure.
But in mathematics, you deduce everything very rigorously. If you claim that economics is logic, you need to deduce stuff. They've been challenged about this from like the 1980s, and they never did it. They never do it. Like we know, you cannot have like economics just from like two axioms. One, because that's logically impossible. You need multiple axioms, even if you think some of them are obvious. You still need to make them explicit. Second thing is, we know we have counterexamples. Like we know there are some commodities whose demand curve is upward sloping. It's rare, but we know they exist. Like, right?
What is an example of that? I don't actually know.
Well, I mean, think of like a Supreme shirt or something, right? Like if it was really cheap, no one would want to buy it. But if it's like really expensive,
sure, yeah, that makes sense. Sure.
I don't know, but I mean, it's a thing. It's a thing. It's called like a Vebler good or something. So yeah, you learn about it. It's rare. You can usually assume they don't exist, but yeah, Veblen good. Yeah. Either way, whatever. I can talk to you about this another time. Right now, I need to stay quiet. So.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Either way, I'll watch the entire thing. I'll try. Is it good?
Yeah. I think. I mean, it's fun. I mean, it's not like heated debate or anything. It's just
Okay. He's nice. I don't like him.
Okay. Well. If you want to chat with me live, sub here or go to Nonfon420 on Twitch or Kick via the links below. Once again, please like and sub to help with the algorithm, and consider sending a donation through YouTube Super Thanks to directly support me, and I'll make sure to reply to any question you ask. See you guys next time.